Hello, my name is Marisa and I'm a physical therapist at Body Connect Health and Wellness in Washington, D.C. We're a clinic that specializes in treating folks with pelvic floor dysfunction of all genders. And one particular population that we work with is women in the prenatal, postpartum, perimenopausal, and menopausal phase of life when it comes to a very specific thing called pelvic organ prolapse. So what is pelvic organ prolapse? So pelvic organ prolapse, we have three main organs that we're talking about. We're talking about our bladder, our uterus, and our rectum. And our bladder, uterus, and rectum are suspended in the pelvis via ligaments that are holding them into the pelvic bony structure as well as the muscular structure. When we have a prolapse, the actual thing that is happening is that one of these organs is dropping into the vaginal canal. And when you think about a woman's pelvis, we have a big hole in the basin of our pelvis, right? And we have the vaginal canal coming out of the opening of the vagina and attaching up into the uterus. Now, if the ligaments of the uterus become weak or overstretched, like let's say after labor, like a long labor and delivery and lots of pushing, if they become weak and overstretched, the whole entire structure of the uterus can then begin to descend down into the vaginal canal, and that would be a uterine prolapse. Now, sometimes that can happen with the bladder. Let's say same mechanism, that there's a long intense labor and you just have stretched some of these ligaments around the bladder, and that bladder can then shift backwards so that it's falling into the vaginal canal. And then the same thing can happen with the rectum, where the rectum shifts forward and falls into the vaginal canal. I want to use these models to try to explain it a little bit. Now, one thing to note about these models is that these are firm and rigid models, and our tissue is not firm and rigid. So what you have here is you have the bladder, and then this is the vaginal canal, the uterus with the fallopian tubes, and here's the rectum right behind. So this would be like a side view of the organs in the pelvis. And again, to note, this is the vaginal canal, so it's a flexible structure. It's not this firm and rigid structure. So one of the things that can happen is when let's say the ligaments that are supporting the uterus, so we have really strong ligaments that are helping to stabilize the uterus within the pelvis. When those ligaments get really weak, or the muscular structures around the pelvis, so your abdominal muscles and your pelvic floor muscles get really weak, as well as a weakening of the vagina itself, your uterus can actually start to fall into the vagina, right? So that's one type. That would be a uterine prolapse. The other thing that can happen is that if the ligaments around the bladder get weak, or the pelvic floor muscles that are supporting the bladder become weak, or this front wall of the vagina becomes weak, the bladder can start to shift backwards into the vagina. So again, this is a firm structure, but what happens is the bladder is literally pushing in, and you can feel the bladder within the vagina. The same thing can happen with the rectum. So the back wall of the vagina can get weak, and that rectum can just drop right down into the vagina. Again, it doesn't mean that the actual rectum is in the vagina. The wall of the vagina is there. It's just that the organ is pushing into that wall.